so good to see you all. It's been a while. We saw some of you during the summer at different events and of course at Vintage, but it's just so great to be starting our Center Conversations schedule again. And now we're on a run till next summer. So we're going to have some great ones in 2015, but those announcements will come. My name is Glenda Gephardt. For those who don't know me, I'm the director of the center, and I'm going to kick off today's Center Conversation gathering with a whole bunch of announcements. So bear with me, but it's all good stuff. First of all, some of you may have noticed the driver suits hanging. We're so excited and so proud that Chip Robinson came in last week or the week before and donated 4 of his driver suits. So if you hadn't seen those, take a look at them. It's just really exciting that he recognized the work we're doing, the value of our operation, and honored us by doing that. Today in the Collier Room, for the first time, we've set out photos by Joe Calley that he gave the center to sell to raise money for our operations, and we're very, very thankful to Joe. He's here today. Wait, sure, Joe. If you find photos that you'd like, find Joe. He'll tell you the story behind them, he promises. He'll also autograph them for you if you want. So check out Joe's photos in the Collier Room. Our favorite videographer, Ron Hills, brought copies today of the land speed record talk. So those are on the table with all of the other videos. So get a copy of that. If you weren't here, you missed an amazing talk. Get a video, and then you'll know what we were all so impressed with when George Webster did that. How many of you are on Twitter? Yeah, I knew I was going to get that answer. Half of us say, what's Twitter? Well, tell your kids or your grandkids, we're on Twitter now. And if they use Twitter, just search for International Motor Racing Research Center, and they can follow us. And that's all I know. I can't explain it further. Well, Bill's on LinkedIn, if you use LinkedIn. I always thought that was pretty impressive. Right, Bill? Our next talk is November 8th, and that is Mike Martin speaking about IMRRC. And that should be a really, really good talk also. We're very excited about that, too, as we are for all of them. Mike's coming from Seattle to speak with us about that and to do more research for his next book. Bill Green especially assisted Mike on this first book, which we do have in our bookstore if you wanted to buy a copy. And then lastly, speaking of buying, don't forget your Fiat tickets if you haven't gotten them yet. We still have tickets, and it's a sweet car. So that's all I'll say on that. And I think my list is done. So I'm very glad you're all here. It's going to be a good afternoon here. And at this time, I'll introduce J.C. Argetsinger, who will introduce our speaker. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Glenda. Those of you who don't know, that's Glenda Gephardt, who's been with the Racing Center even before it was formed, at least 16 years ago, and she's the person who makes the trains run on time. And we're very, very grateful for everything she does. Now, she mentioned the Fiat, and I see many people out here who I know who've already bought tickets. We have a lot of our faithful fans who come to every one of these conversations. We have some distinguished guests, and we have some other new people who haven't been here before. As you know, we are a nonprofit, and we are funded entirely by the beneficence of the folks here in the audience and other people around the country. We do have a big fan base. We have a number of sponsors who send us in their $25, their $100, their $500. Some even send us $5,000 a year to keep us going. But one of our big fundraisers is that raffle car. Now, this year's car, I think, is a very exciting car. It's something you can drive to the grocery store, and you can also pretend like you're a Grand Prix driver. It's a Abarth Fiat. We all know about their success in racing, and people in Europe, and maybe even in this country, are racing these Fiats. But you can use it. It's a practical car, and there is a trip to Italy that goes along with that. The tickets are $40 for one, 3 for 100. So it's a big part of our effort to keep us in business every year. We do have a wonderful speaker here today, and he kind of bridges both the oval world and the road world, which are coming closer and closer together. As you know, we've had a number of oval track presentations in recent years, and of course we always have been identified with road racing, but we do cover all forms of racing in all parts of the country and around the world. We do have one guest that I really do want to mention. Andy Hurtubise is here today. Andy, if you could stand up. Where's Andy? There he is. Andy was a very successful sprint and midget driver, and he is the son of the great Jim Hurtubise, of course, of Indianapolis and worldwide fame in Indy-type cars. So we're awfully glad you came down. Are you living in Buffalo now? Good. Well, our speaker today is an author. He has just published a new book on Road America, which I just received last night and stayed up late reading. He is a native of Milwaukee. He got involved with the Milwaukee Mile at a very young age. His father was a filmmaker and a fan, and participated in the events there, organizing them and helping out. And so our speaker, at a very early age, he had the same sort of influence that I had. My father infected me with this racing bug, and all of you in the audience I know are racing fans, and it's something, once you've been bitten, you don't get it out of your system. And so Steve Zautke has driven in with his wonderful wife Susan. They drove in from Milwaukee last night, and we were so delighted that he's taking the time to do that. He was the historian for a while at the Milwaukee Mile. He also participates in this Henry Miller Club News, and he also is doing work for the new SVRA magazine that has come out. He's a wonderful writer and historian, and he's also a devotee of Road America. Obviously, you can see it by the book here, which he is going to autograph and hopefully sell you a few of the books. And I think he's got some film clips also that he will have available. After the talk is over and after he's finished signing, our own historian Bill Green is going to take him for a fast lap of the old racetrack here at Watkins Glen. I imagine most of you have already driven that track, but if you haven't, we have maps of the circuit for your perusal if you'd like. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Steve Zautke. Steve, where are you? There he is. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenda and JC. Appreciate it. Hospitality here has been fantastic, and I just want to say thank you once again for having me. And I had the opportunity, Mike Martinson will be here, will be the next speaker. We did a book signing at Road America earlier this summer. Fantastic book, highly, highly recommended. It's a kind of a little bit of a forgotten era in road racing, and I'm sure JC will attest to this. The IMRRC was one of the greatest eras in racing, especially in road racing, so it's highly recommended. The topic today is the Milwaukee Mile. A lot of people have heard about it, and it's obviously my favorite track next to Road America, and it's the world's oldest continuously operating racetrack. A lot of people say, well, I thought Indy was in Milwaukee. The operative word is continuously. The Indiana Fairgrounds actually held a race a couple months before, and that's the 1 mile oval in Indianapolis, which is their state fairgrounds. And they held a race earlier in the year. However, they didn't hold races regularly till after the war. So thus the Milwaukee is the oldest continuously operating racetrack, and it's more of a marketing thing. Bill and I were just talking about some people. Knoxville has been in Iowa has been holding races since 1901, so nationally sanctioned. You can go round and round. It's like anything. You change numbers around and pretty much debate something till all end. But it's one of the favorite racetracks of mine. Originally, State Fair was. I don't want to overwhelm you guys with this. So, originally, State Fair rotated from the 1850s. The state incorporated in 1848, and then they said, let's have a state fair like all states do. And it rotated around Madison. And this is kind of interesting. Most state fairs are centered at the capital, but Milwaukee was such a big city at that time. It was in the top 15 up until the 1940s, and also because it was on Lake Michigan. So many of the people in the state and the government thought Milwaukee would be a better place to showcase the state than Madison at that point, which was nearly which was not as big as it is now and not as well known. And it's been an ongoing thing where they were moving it. They moved to Janesville, to Oshkosh, and a lot of people don't realize, also in the early 1970s, there was talk of moving the fair from West Allis, which is a suburb of Milwaukee, to Madison once again. And so much so that the promoters at the time, the Marchese brothers, Carl and Tootie Marchese, were actually thinking and had looked at purchasing land in southern Wisconsin and were in talks of building a 1.5 super speedway. The beginning. The first race was held at Milwaukee in the weekend of September 11th and 12th, 1903. This is a photo of Barney Oldfield and Tom Cooper. Those cars were owned by Henry Ford. One was called the 999, which is the more famous car, and the other one was called the Red Devil. Tom Cooper is somebody that kind of is forgotten in history. It's kind of an amusing story, not for Tom Cooper though. Henry Ford was a very devout religious man, as was his wife. Tom Cooper is kind of known of a carouser. And Henry Ford's wife was hearing these stories about Tom Cooper and what type of a person he was off the racetrack, and she just told Henry that maybe Tom Cooper needs to work somewhere else. So Tom Cooper is kind of lost to history. And the first race was held, like I said, September 11th and 12th, 1903. Unfortunately, the first fatality happened. That's the Red Devil. That's the other car. You see models of the Ford 999, and the 999 is in the Henry Ford Museum. Unfortunately, there was a crash, and Frank Day lost his life in the north turn. That's located just at pretty much the apex of turn 4 on September 12th, 1903. It was his first race. He was from Columbus, Ohio, from a well-to-do family. And the racing back then is not anywhere how it was today. Back then it was more barnstorming. And what they would do is have match races. It was more of a spectacle. People would come out because the automobile was so new. And they would have 1, 2, 3 car races. And they were only for maybe 1 or 2 laps around this fair park, around the fairgrounds. And unfortunately, he got pitched. The car pitched up, and he got thrown into the ground, causing head injuries. Barney Oldfield was not at the track that day because he had received injuries earlier in the month. And Frank Day was filling in for him. Here's a shot of, this is one of my favorite shots. This is a shot from the Al Krause collection. Al Krause was a longtime historian at the Milwaukee Mile. Spent many days with Al Krause. I guess you could call him my mentor. Was a neat fella and had been attending races at the fair park since the early 30s. Passed away about 10 years ago. And he did a lot of the Milwaukee Mile programs are pretty much known, especially from 1961 on. A lot of neat stuff, and they're very highly collectible, mainly because of Al. Al was pretty neat. Tom Marchese would tell Al, when putting together the programs, he said, "Al, I only want you to put in enough for for the people to look at a couple of the pages during downtimes or a caution flag. Don't make the stories too involved. So he would have a lot of these photos in the program, such as this one, where it says, "Here's Barney Oldfield and his peerless green dragon." And there's a number of these cars built. This is actually a shot of Barney at the Dallas Fairgrounds in 1905. However, Barney did set a track record in this car at Milwaukee in 1905. Barney also drove a lot of pretty iconic cars back in the day, including the Blitzen Benz. But he also drove a Duroc, which was a French-built car, the Peerless Green Dragon that we saw previously, and then this is the Blitzen Benz that he drove at Milwaukee. And you can see there's a different set of the fairgrounds. The stands look a little bit different from the classic that you would see in the 50s and 60s. These were actually lost in a fire in 1914. Racing was a spectacle. It certainly was. The first 100-mile race wasn't held at Milwaukee until 1915, so you had a lot of match races and what. So you can see if the automobile, maybe you'd see them, driving down a street at 20 some miles an hour. A lot of the roads were dirt back then. But if you were a kid in these stands and you saw these cars coming down at you at 65, 75 miles an hour, no mufflers on them, it was quite the spectacle to see these cars with the smell and everything. It was quite incredible. Here's another shot. Not much for pit safety back then. Just kind of lean out over and take a look. Here's another shot, and I love this shot. You can see the original. There were now we're on the fourth grandstand at Milwaukee, but this is an early one. You can kind of see the innate workmanship, especially look at that starter stand. And this is probably one of the more famous races. That's the famous Golden Submarine. That was one of the first race cars that was built by Harry Miller, and racing against Ralph De Palma. And on this day, Oldfield actually won the race. But it's just one of the more iconic photos at Milwaukee in 1917. Badger-built Speedster. A lot of people know G.I. Case as a tractor company. However, they're very involved in racing before World War II. And here we got a little shot of Louis Disbrow in the Case Special. Finished 8th in 1913. There's also a shot, if you see, of the 1911 Indy 500 at the start. You see these race cars that have mouths on them. Those are also G.I. Case race cars. And they were on the front row at Milwaukee, or at Indianapolis in 1911. But G.I. Case has a very, very significant racing history. And in fact, a friend of mine was doing some research, and he decided to go over to G.I. Case, which is still based out of Racine, and they still have quite a accumulation of memorabilia and research. It's still there, located at the company headquarters in Racine. In the 1920s, the mile kind of faded from the national view. The reason for that was because of the board tracks. Board tracks, you had Beverly Hills, Altoona, Kansas City. Those were these huge, beautiful speed palaces. So the fairgrounds were kind of forgotten. You had dirt, dust, and whatnot. Well, the people would rather go to a board track and see these beautiful 91-inch, cubic-inch Millers and all the top drivers at a board track. So Milwaukee pretty much had more of the homegrown drivers were kind of the rule back then. So these are, if you were a fan back then, these are the guys you would see at the store or driving down the street. So there's more of a personal connection with these guys because they lived in your hometown. There was Carl Marchese. He was a driver and drove at Indianapolis in 1920. 27 before he got hurt at Springfield. Chet Barnacle, we're going to see a lot of photos of him later. He later became an official. And then Tootie Marchese, Ted Roston, and then some of the Stag Nowicki, Louis Frank, Romy Sherwinski. That's the Milwaukee way of saying that. And then Porter Short. And these were just guys that were quite the speed demons back in the day. Tony Woolman. Some of you may heard the name Tony Woolman. Tony Woolman was from South Milwaukee, which was south of Milwaukee, located right off the Lake Michigan. And Tony Woolman, if you talk to some of the drivers, Chris Economaki, I think it was always said, who is the best driver you always said? I'm trying to remember who it was. It was more of an obscure driver in the 30s. I'll remember in a second. But Al Krause always said Tony Woolman was the best, the historian that I spoke about before. Tony Woolman was the best driver you ever saw. If you talk to guys like, if you were able to talk to guys like Tony Bettenhausen and Paul Russo, highly respected driver. Why a Rex Mays Classic? Rex Mays Classic started in 1950, I should say. Rex Mays was one of the more popular drivers prior to the war. And then during the war, he flew bombers and fighters, ferrying them from the United States to England. This is the 100-mile race at Milwaukee in 1948. And the car on the left is Duke Dismore's car. That's Duke Dismore laying on the track. The number one is Ted Horn. And then the car on the right, that's Rex Mays' car. What we don't see is out of frame. Rex Mays is in the groove, waving to the drivers to steer clear of Duke Dismore, saving his life. Unfortunately, about a year and a half later at Delmore, California, Rex Mays was involved in a similar crash where he got thrown from the car. Unfortunately, he did not survive because he got hit by another car. So in 1915, it was decided that the 100-mile race in June would be called the Rex Mays Classic. But the State Fairgrounds wasn't just for racing. Up until what was County Stadium in Milwaukee, the Green Bay Packers would play 4 games in Milwaukee. To this day, it's what they call the Gold Package when they moved all the games to all the Green Bay games to Green Bay. The reasoning for that, Green Bay obviously could not support a National Football League team back then. So what they did is they would have 4 games in Milwaukee. And the 1939 World Championship was held at State Fair Park. The track the football field would be located, I got a shot later, kind of towards the south turn, just behind where the pit area would be. And in that game, the Packers won the championship 27-0. And here's a shot of, you can see the football field on the left-hand side, and then also the quarter-mile racetrack that they would have midget racing on. And then this is also kind of a unique shot because it shows, this would be pre-war. They built this grandstand, was part of the WPA program back then. That's when they built it, and you can see only half of it is done at that point. Midget car racing took the nation by storm after World War II. People in racing, I don't think can grasp how big midget racing was after World War II, especially on the West Coast. You hear stories like Gilmore Stadium and that. One of my favorite stories that was told to me was Sam Hanks was a very successful midget driver, and he would come to the bank on Mondays because he had raced pretty much Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, and sometimes would win all the feature races. Well, back then you literally got paid a cut of the gate. So he would have dollar bills and $5 bills and coins shoved in every pocket, and he would wear a sport coat. So when he would go to the bank, he'd be pulling out dollar bills and putting them on the counter, dropping them, and the teller would be looking at him, what were you doing? But it was incredible. I mean, that's That's a shot for a 100-mile race in the late 40s, and look at that grandstand. It was huge. Here's a shot of Bob Wilkie of Leader Card Racers. Before he started an IndyCar team, he was a distributor for Curtis Craft Midgets. And that's a Ray Richards, who was a driver from Chicago, drove his car. That's at Milwaukee. That's about 1940. So you guys should recognize that fella. It's A.J. Foyt. He's driving a Bob Higman midget at Milwaukee in 1957. And that's the program cover. That was the final one, the final 100-mile race, USAC race at Milwaukee for quite some time. From the period of late 40s up until 1961, that would be held usually the day before the IndyCar race. And as they got later into the late 50s, and unfortunately attendance was dipping less and less and less. And Tom Marchese in 1961 says, if we don't make money on this is going to be the final year. Unfortunately, on that Saturday, they only drew probably about 5,000 people, and that wasn't enough for them. So after 1961, they stopped having it. They did have a standalone race in 1965. It was sanctioned by Badger Midgets, and Jigger Soroy, who some of you may remember for almost winning the pole in 1969 in Indianapolis, won that race. Tie in a sport coat. Well, one thing I know a lot of people I just was somewhere last week and somebody was commenting about an old photo. Everybody's wearing a tie and a sport coat. This is one of my favorite shots too. Pretty much everybody has a hat, tie, and a sport coat out at dirt car race. This is before the this is 1948, before the race was even paved. Here's another shot. This is looking outside of turn 3. And this is prior to 1954, and you can see just the incredible crowd that was there that day. You can also see a little bit behind the pits. That's part of the football stadium there, and then also lights. You can see the light poles there. And this is a shot from, I believe, 1954 with the Dean Van Lyon car on Jimmy Bryan on the pole. And once again, full grandstands. And in the back there, you see a little, almost looks like a big Pizza Hut. That was the Coliseum. And during the winter, before World War II, they would hold indoor midget races in there. Very popular. Unfortunately, not well ventilated. I talked to a few gentlemen when I was a younger kid, and they said by the end of the night, you were you were getting a little dizzy in there. Bill Vanderwater waving the green flag. 1952, here's a shot. In fact, I was mentioning this to JC earlier. We were talking about women not being allowed in the pit areas, and that's Bess Paoli and Chuck Stevenson. He won the championship, and Bess Paoli was the car owner, but was not allowed in the pits at Indianapolis. Chuck is a great answer to a trivia question. The track was paved in 1954, so he won on the last IndyCar race in 1953 on the dirt for J.C. Agajanian, and then 1954 won the first race for him when the track was paved. The greatest hooligan race ever, 1960. This was the June race at Milwaukee. There were almost 60 cars entered for 22 starting spots. So on the pole there, that's Jim Packard. Behind him was the winner of the 1960 Indy 500, Jim Rathman. Also in this race were Jimmy Bryan and Troy Ruttman, previous Indy 500 winners. Future national champion Roger McCluskey was in this race. It's just a who's who of racing. This was a 20-lap race that was held before the 100-lap race, and the top two went into the feature. And no, Rathman, Bryan, and Ruttman did not make it. This is the 1960 200-miler in August. Roger Ward, you see on the pole. What's interesting is that third car next to the 97. It's an interesting story. That's the Braun plywood car. That was a brand new Epperly. Unfortunately, it came to Indianapolis too late and did not make the race. That's Parnelli Jones in that car. Qualified second. Everybody was like, who the heck is this kid from California? Later, a few weeks later, he was at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway doing a Firestone test. The car was not handling right. Didn't feel right. So Tony Bettenhausen came over to the car, Tony Bettenhausen Sr., and Parnelli goes, this car just doesn't feel right. So Tony gets into the car and comes in after 2 laps and said, I can't believe this kid kept the car off the wall. They made some adjustments and hit about 148 miles an hour. Tony went to his car owner, Lindsey Hopkins, at the time and said, buy that car. If you buy that car, I can win the Indianapolis 500 next year. So he was the fastest car then in 1961. Unfortunately, was test hopping a car for Paul Russo and was killed. But many people believe that Bettenhausen could have won the 500 that year in 1961. But in an indirect way, it was because of Parnelli Jones. There we got a shot of Roger Ward winning a race in 1961 in the Sun City car. And Roger Ward was Mr. Milwaukee Mile. He's got the most wins for any IndyCar driver with 7, and won a variety of stock car races at the track too. Loved the track. And Roger, I did an interview with him about 15 years ago, one of the first interviews I did, and he said he was the first driver, and it's funny how so many echo the same thing after, was the driver's track. He said, what I loved about Milwaukee is it was flat, and you could pick a line. If your car wasn't handling, you could pick another line and maybe make the car handle. And with Milwaukee, a driver could carry the car, especially in those days, more than you could at any other track. So Milwaukee, the cream of the crop, kind of rose to the top. And Roger Ward was certainly, when he teamed up with A.J. Watson and Bob Wilkie in 1959, that was the team to beat. There's another shot of Roger. That's actually Lloyd Ruby, who didn't have a ride that day, helping Roger get buckled in during practice. And then J.C. Agajanian with the cowboy hat. It's amazing. If there's a photo, J.C. always works himself into the photo somehow. 1962. One of the more incredible races back in history, only because of Don Davis. Don Davis was a driver from Phoenix and was driving a dirt car, and everything was working well for Don, and he qualified in the top 10 and passed A.J. Foyt. A.J. Foyt was the Zen driver at that point. Won Indy in 61, had problems in 62, was the defending two-time at that point national champion. Here comes Don Davis, passes A.J. Foyt to lead. Incredible. And the crowd was going crazy. Here's this guy in this Chevy-powered dirt car just taking it to the roadsters that day. And Don was literally dirt tracking it through the corners. Unfortunately, a right rear tire blew, and he spun. However, he spun with AJ right behind him. AJ went to take the lead, but everybody was booing AJ because what they thought happened was AJ hit Don Davis. So he went to win the race, and you can see the expression on his face. And the reason why he has this impression, because he's being interviewed and the crowd is booing AJ because they thought he booted Don Davis out of the race. Changing of the guard. Milwaukee is also known for the first rear-engine victory in IndyCar racing with the iconic Lotus cars. There's a shot. I believe that is actually on Friday, before the race, before the 1963 Tony Bettenhausen 200, with Jim Clark on the left and Dan Gurney on the right. They qualified on the front row that day. Clark and then Gurney was second. And people who might not know, how come Dan Gurney didn't do as well as Jimmy Clark that day? The reason why was they only had one set of the correct carburetors. At that time, they were running basically a stock block Fairlane block engine, and they only had one set of the correct carbs. So unfortunately, Dan had to use another set of carburetors, and he told me when he would go through the corners, the car would bog and cough, and then would pick up on the exit. So unfortunately, he was running about a half a second behind Clark's time. But they were so far ahead of the Roadsters that he was still able to qualify on the first row. Eventually, Gurney finished third with AJ passing him. And this is the reason everybody loved Jimmy Clark. They asked Jimmy Clark why he didn't lap AJ Foyt. He said it's one thing to beat a man, but you don't want to rub it in his face. So that's why he didn't lap AJ Foyt that day. And this is a shot, I believe, on a Wednesday or Thursday before the race. This is in Milwaukee at Bill Trainer's shop, who ran Zico Lubaid, and they were a Ford-backed USAC stock car team. Ford backed the Lotus program, so there you go. Here you got the Lotus team sharing the garage and working on the cars before the race. Jim Hurtubise, 1964, was one of the most popular drivers at Milwaukee. The 1964 Rex Mays 100 was one of the more popular races just because AJ Foyt on the middle there, and Roger Ward and Jim Hurtubise waged an epic battle, dicing back and forth and back and forth. Unfortunately, coming out of turn 4, Roger Ward's gearbox locked up. AJ Foyt was able to avoid him, but unfortunately, Hurtubise went over the right rear tire. The car hit the wall. You see Ward's car on the inside and Foyt continuing on. Hurtubise was knocked out of the car. The car is actually, you can kind of see the white. Those are actually flames, alcohol flames. However, luckily for Hurtubise, it happened right in front of the pit area, and the the pit crewmen and firemen were able to pull him out and put the car out. Probably, who knows, he might not have survived if it was at any other place on the track. Foyt would go on to win the race. Later that year, in 1964, Mario Andretti made his first start in the 1964 Tony Bettenhausen, driving a lightweight Dean Van Lines Roadster. AJ's greatest drive. If you ever see AJ and you don't know what to say, just bring up the dirt track race at Milwaukee. He'll start to smile. He'll soften up. AJ figures this is probably his greatest drive. 1965 in August, his Lotus IndyCar didn't show up, and they had raced the previous Saturday at Springfield. So without the Lotus, AJ said, well, let's unload the dirt car. Let's see what we can do. And he went out to qualify, and Steve Stapp, who was a famous sprint car builder and driver, was crewing for him that day. And he pulls in after qualifying, and he asked Steve how he did. He goes, AJ, I think you're on the pole. And AJ, being AJ, goes, you dumb SOB, you can't even, you can't even use a stopwatch. And sure enough, AJ got on the pole. So AJ, with a dirt car, there's Dan Gurney in a Lotus Ford next to him, went on to finish second. Unfortunately, he had to make a fuel stop later, and Gordon Johncock went on to win the race. If you ask AJ, he'll say Lloyd Ruby won the race, but we don't correct AJ. AJ went to finish second, but many that day, it's funny, it's one of those things where there's probably 35,000 people, but if you survey racing fans in Wisconsin, about 100,000 say they were at that race. Sports cars, yes. In 1954, when they repaved the racetrack, they commissioned a road course to be installed on the inside. And many SCCA national races were held at the Milwaukee Mile in the 50s into the mid-1970s. Racing is people. If you ever talk to anybody who is involved in a professional level, especially with racing, it's not because of the money, it's because of the people you meet in racing. There's a lot of people that you meet. And I think any of us who have been involved in racing definitely feel the same way. That's Tom Marchese after he had retired, and John Cation. The Marcheses then that's the Milwaukee pronunciation. It's actually Marchese, but people in Milwaukee say Marchese, and so instead of correcting them, they just went with Marchese. If any of our Novi fans or fans of the Novi, the famous mechanic was Jean Marcinet, but when he got to Indy, he became Jean Marcinac. So it's one of those. Tom Marchese on the left. This photo was taken about 1985 after he had retired from promoting, and that's John Cation at the right, who took over for the Marcheses and partnered with them in 1968. How that started was racing. There's a lot of unsavory people in racing in the 30s, and especially on the promotion side. And the Marcheses, him and his brother Carl, promoted a midget race at the track in the late 1930s, and the fair board was so impressed how professionally they ran it, because they were businessmen. They were involved in food wholesaling in Milwaukee, and they were so impressed on how they handled themselves and handled the operation that the fair board went to them and presented them exclusive promotion rights to the track. So from that point on up until 1968, they had the exclusive promotional rights at the track. And then 1968, they brought in John Cation to partner with them, and they continued to promote at the track until 1983. Ed 20 Grand Steinbach. Not many people may recognize the name, but if you were, especially in the Midwest in the 50s and 60s, you would recognize his voice. Ed was his full-time job was race announcing, and he announced not only at Milwaukee, but he was from the Chicago area and would announce Chicago area tracks and also up at Road America. There's road racing fans may have heard of there's a documentary made in the early 60s on the Scarabs, and 20 Grand is the one who's narrating it. That's my father on the right, who took movie photographers, and Skitch Henderson on the left, at that time, who was the Tonight Show conductor. And what was neat, in the August races were held during the fair. So when there weren't races, on those other days, there were fair park acts would come through. So it wasn't unusual for a lot of the acts to stick around for the race the next day and watch the races. That's my father and Tom Bigelow from Whitewater, Wisconsin, midget driver and IndyCar driver. This is the Wisconsin auto racing. It doesn't really matter. What it was a dinner. Wisconsin Speedway's dinner. And this was a dinner that they would have before the Rex Mays, usually the weekend before the Rex Mays race. It was right after Indy and before the Rex Mays class, and they would have a dinner. And a lot of the big shots of racing would show up. In the upper left, we have Augie Pabst, and then we have Mel Kenyon, Cale Yarborough from the NASCAR world. That's Bill Johnson. He was a local modified driver and drove midgets. And then we have Don White, was a USAC stock car driver from Keokuk, Iowa. Of course, we have Supertex AJ Foyt, Andy Granatelli. If you're going to have a party, you got to have Andy there. And then, of course, Tony Holman from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. 1968, June 9th. Famous race, unfortunately, that was also the race that Ronnie Duman was killed at in 1968. But also the turbine cars were there. Turbine race cars was very controversial to some people, but I actually brought racing to people. I brought it onto the sports pages. And Lloyd Ruby that year in 1968 won both races. Won the June race and the 150 miler, and then the Bettenhausen 200 driving for Gene White. The last of the Mohicans. There. That's Bob Harkey in 1970 running next to Al Unser in the 1970 Tony Bettenhausen 200. That's the last dirt car to race in a national championship IndyCar race at Milwaukee. That's Bud Tinglestead, who was entered in the race, unfortunately had mechanical issues and did not make the race. Stock car racing was huge at the Milwaukee Mile. This is a race from 1948. This is the first AAA sanctioned race that was held at Milwaukee. And it was truly the number one racetrack for the North on the USAC and AAA side. Yes, they did race Edsels. That's Edsel on the left there, and that's Don White in the number 3 car, the Seco Lube car. There's a shot of Eddie Sachs and AJ Foyt. This is taken in 1962 or 63, and what was popular with the USAC series. You kind of see what's happening now in the NASCAR Nationwide series is. In the USAC series, you would have a lot of the IndyCar drivers race at the bigger races. Here you see Eddie Sachs and AJ Foyt racing the USAC cars, USAC stock cars, known for IndyCar racing. And the reason with that, because the IndyCar racers would race in the stock car series, NASCAR really never cultivated their base, the Don Whites, the Butch Hartmans, and those drivers. This is a shot of Norm Nelson, who was one of those drivers, who's strictly a stock car driver. This is a shop in Racine, and there's a shot of his transport rig. No tractor trailers in those days. Here's another shot, and that's how they used to go to the races back then. That's a 2-car team. That's a factory-backed, Plymouth-backed team. And it's Jim Hurtubise' car up on the top, and then Norm's car from 1965. 1968, the Miller 200. This is, many people think that this is actually the first corporate race sponsorship. In 1968, Miller had a large part. They sponsored the fire crew back in the day, and they had a lot of ties with the Milwaukee Mile. And they approached John Cation, who we saw with Tom Marchese, about sponsoring the race. And what that did, it added a large purse, and this was one of the larger, for a stock car race, this was the largest race on the USAC stock car side at the time, and it was really kind of catapulted the race and Milwaukee into the national scene. Corporate activation. So here's the program from 1971, and in order to receive the accessory awards, you had to run a large Miller High Life sticker in your car. That's my dad on the right, and Armin Krieger. A lot of his shots are used in here. Armin was he's in the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame as a photographer, and shot from the late 30s up until 1993. Was a family friend, and was a neat guy. And as a good photographer, you see he's probably already got the shot of Larry Berwanger hitting the wall. Now he's checking to see what else is happening. The Winged Warriors. The Milwaukee Mile held more races with the Dodge Daytona on the left and the Plymouth Superbird than any other. People may think Daytona, Talladega. NASCAR banned or restricted the cars in 1971 by restricting their engine size, and then by 1972 they were outright banned. However, USAC did not ban the cars, and 12 races were held at the Milwaukee Mile, 4 each year between 1970 and 1972. Here's another shot coming out of turn 2, and the late 70s and late 60s and early 70s was probably one of the biggest attendance years for the Milwaukee Mile, so much so they even added auxiliary bleachers outside turn 2. That's Bobby Unser's in Nichols Engineering Plymouth Superbird 1972. This car held the track record at Milwaukee for many years. Trouble on the horizon. 1970, the USAC series decided to bring in pony cars. And you could run a small block pony car, such as a Chevrolet Camaro, with a smaller engine size, but with lighter weight, next to the Hemis that were being run, like that one right there with Paul Feldner and a Dodge Magnum, which previously was a Dodge Charger. Here we have this is 1977. This is Dave Watson. And USAC stock car series was, for a while, was hand in hand with the NASCAR series. However, by the early 70s, the cars stopped. The evolution slowed down on the USAC side, whereas in a NASCAR was continuing engineering cars. Cars were getting faster and whatnot. It was more stagnant on USAC side. Here's a good example. This is Dave Watson winning a race in 1977. That car started in 1972 as a Chevy Nova. All they did is just reskin it, put a new body, a Buick Skylark body, and he was winning races. 1978, another racing series challenged USAC at the Milwaukee Mile, and that was the American Speed Association. That's Mark Martin as a 19-year-old rookie. These were lighter cars, faster cars in the USAC series too. And more drivers started to migrate from the USAC series to ASA. Here's Dick Trickle after winning the Miller 200. Also promotion. ASA with Rex Robbins as the head of it was really good with promoting races, and they would try different things. Here's a perfect example. Who else would have Dick Trickle and Alan Kowicki and faking a boxing match before a race? NASCAR came to the Milwaukee Mile for the first time in 1984. Here's a shot of Alan Kowicki making his first NASCAR start at Milwaukee. And the Grand National Series, as then it was called, was not the same Grand National Series you see today. It was definitely a lesser series and did not draw the crowds. Stock car races faded away after '85. USAC did, and NASCAR left at 1984 and 1985, returned in 1993, and ran at the track until 2009, and then moved to Road America in 2010. Don't forget this is a reminder to myself. Don't forget, I mentioned it earlier, the quarter-mile dirt track. You saw in that one area shot, that was the quarter-mile dirt track. And on Thursday nights, they would race modifieds at the track. And this is quite a popular series that ran. Some people may have heard of Slinger, the Slinger Raceway in Wisconsin. They would run on Sunday nights, and then they would also run at Hales Corners, which also ran midgets on Friday nights. So a lot of these were very popular for kids growing up, and a lot of the heroes to this day. Billy Englehart, who drove Indy cars, that was his hero right there, the Mouse. Miles Mouse Melius. 1971, USAC had a corporate sponsor, which was Marlboro, the Marlboro Championship Trail. And this is the program for the Rex Mays 150. And this is, many people point at with the split in 1970 and 1979 with USAC and CART and everything, you can almost kind of take a look at this. This might have been an early shot over the bow, so to speak, or misstep by USAC. 1971, Philip Morris sponsored the whole series, put a lot of money into the series. The only caveat they wanted was they wanted to be the exclusive sponsor, cigarette sponsor on the series. Viceroy was also sponsoring the cars for Parnelli Jones. USAC didn't want to offend or take that sponsorship away from Parnelli Jones, so they told Marlboro to walk, basically. That same year, Winston also started to sponsor NASCAR. NASCAR did not have an issue with telling other teams who had another sponsor, you need to take a walk, because they understood the growth that was, that was possible with this corporate sponsorship, sponsoring the whole series. Thus, after 1971, Marlboro walked away from the sponsorship of USAC. A.J. Foyt. 1965, I told you about how he finished second at Milwaukee in the dirt car. He also did the same thing in 1969. However, the cars were advancing that much more and did not have the success that he had in 1965, and I believe he finished ninth in that race. 1972, once again, there's the Viceroy car, Parnelli Jones. That one's driven by Mario Andretti, the super team. There's Joe Leonard also Mark Donahue, after 1972 Indy 500, where he won, also this was his only race at Milwaukee at the 1972 Rex Mays 150, where people say Mark Donahue wasn't an oval track driver. He did pretty well, though. He finished second in his first and only race at Milwaukee. 1974, we have Johnny Rutherford won his first race at Milwaukee, driving the Team McLaren car, and that's Roger McCluskey, who was the defending national championship, running alongside. There's Johnny in victory lane, and that's Jack Baker. He was a local radio announcer who was also the track announcer for many years at Milwaukee. Had the greatest leisure suits of anybody. There's Super Tex. That's A.J. Foyt in 1974. He won a race in 75 on his way to his fifth, I believe that would be, national championship, or sixth national championship in 75, and also won races in 1979. However, only won 4 races at Milwaukee, only. And there's Bobby Unser. Bobby Unser in the Dan Gurney Jorgensen Steel Eagle. Had the track record at Milwaukee for many years, not only in a stock car, but also an Indy car. Why Tom Steve in 1975 Indy 500 photo? As a young kid, after this race, they said Tom Steve walked away and was not hurt. I was going to kick out of that. Yeah, he wasn't really hurt. Well, he had to skip the next race at Milwaukee because he wasn't hurt. In August of that year, he came to the track, and I was walking down Pit Road with my dad. There was Tom Sneva sitting on the wall. So we're talking to Tom Sneva, and he pulls back his driver's suit, takes off his watch, and you can see the flash burns there that he received in that crash. He wasn't hurt, but he had a heck of a concussion. Rick Mears, the Oval Meister. Rick Mears' first race was at Milwaukee at the Rex Mays 1978 Rex Mays 150. And Al Unser, who had won the Indy 500 the week before, ran out of gas with a few laps to go. Rick Mears, as a rookie, takes the lead. And out of turn 3, he ran out of gas and crossed the finish line at about 50 miles an hour, probably even less, with Johnny Rutherford fast approaching. But Rick was able to win his first race. This is one of the most famous races, too, at Milwaukee. 1981 Rex Mays Classic 150. And that's Mike Mosley in the Dan Gurney, John Ward designed Eagle, Chevy stock block. And he was unable to qualify for the race. He blew an engine, and they had to replace the engine Saturday afternoon, Saturday night. They got the car ready. They put the car at the back of the pack, and he went to win the race. Mario Andretti. No, where is my... There should be a photo of Mario there. It dropped off. Here's A.J. Foyt. And what I like about this shot, I took this shot. The man in the refueling rig, that's Billy Vukovic, who had raced the previous week at Indy but did not have a ride. And that's Billy Vukovic refueling the car, and Stan Fox was changing the left front tire. I thought that's a heck of a pit crew to have. He had 2 drivers in the Indy 500 the previous week, and they're working on a pit crew. Rocket Rick. There's Rick Mears after winning the race in 1990. Newman Haas Racing. 7 wins between 1985 and 2006, including 5 out of 6 wins between 91 and 96 with a variety of drivers. There's a famous shot. I love that, and there's a reason why I love this shot. That's the victory podium. Of course, Michael won the race. John Andretti finished second, and there's Mario in third. Mario's a competitor. Mario wants to be on that top podium. You can tell in that shot right there. No family pride at that moment. That came later. Nigel Mania, 1993. And that year was my first year professionally working at Milwaukee as a videographer, and that was true Nigel Mania. Basically, they told me just take photos, just get video of Nigel. And it was a true zoo. Wherever he walked, there was a crowd of people. They actually had to put 2 state troopers on him for the weekend. The media crush was that big. 1992 Formula One champion, and he wasn't able to come to contract terms with Williams, and was able to come over to the United States, drive for Newman Haas, and dominated. This guy never drove an oval race before, almost killed himself at Phoenix, learned a valuable lesson there by not taking ovals, not taking them too seriously. Learned, okay, you got to take these things seriously, and from that point on, just really took to the ovals, and won at Milwaukee as well as Loudon, and just dominated the year. Speaking of domination, Penske domination. Of course, everybody remembers in 1994 the Mercedes that dominated the race at Indianapolis with Al Unser winning. The following week, they went to Milwaukee with the normal car with the normal engine that they were using on the kart series at that point. However, Penske dominated the race with Al Unser winning the race, Paul Tracy and Emerson Fittipaldi winning, filling out the podium. As a light rain, you can tell it's wet there, and it just started to rain with 5 laps of race, and they called the race. The Milwaukee Mile today. There we go. It's sad, but I still get people who come up to me and go, "What's happening at the mile?" And I say, "Well, they still run an IndyCar race there. The IZOD, IndyCar series runs there, and there's a late model race that runs there, and then of course we have the Harry Miller meet. So, but the IndyCar's the attendance is kept growing every year in the last 3 years since Michael Andretti's group has taken over the race in 2011. So it's growing. This year, Will Power won the race for Penske and went on to win the national championship. And the Miller Club. If you get a chance, if you're in the Midwest in July, the Harry Miller Club Vintage IndyCar event is held usually it's the week after the 4th of July. That's the easiest way to remember. And we have anywhere between 50 and 60 vintage Indy cars from pretty much 1911 all the way up to 1965. It's all front engine cars. And here's a shot of 9 Miller race cars, and that's the primary focus is dedicated to Harry Miller, his cars dominated in the Indy cars in the 1920s, and developed the 4-cylinder Miller engine, which became the Offenhauser engine, which was used in IndyCar racing up until the late 70s, and it was started by Dave Eline, Chuck Davis, and Bob Sutherland, those 3 collectors, and still runs today. And this year we had our 20th anniversary. And that's a shot a couple years ago of the cars. We always do a traditional shot of all the race cars on the front row at Milwaukee, or on the front straightaway at Milwaukee. And there's a shot of 2 Bulls Seal Fast race cars, sister race cars that we were able to reunite, and then we're running on the Milwaukee Mile in West Dallas, Wisconsin. Thank you. Yeah, I did a book on, thanks to your brother, guiding me, who did one on Watkins Glen along with Bill Green. I did one on Road America, and it was, it's funny, the Milwaukee Mile guy doing a book on Road America, but that is my second home. I truly love the racetrack and everything that's involved around it too. It's been a love affair. And, they say you can't serve 2 lovers, but with the Milwaukee Mile, Road America, we're very blessed in Wisconsin to have 2 such high-quality racetracks. And I will have books available to sign than to purchase afterwards, and as well as Milwaukee Mile videos. The shots of that, my father Bill, unfortunately who has passed, but shot movies for the Marchese's. And how that came about is my dad was shooting video, and there was an accident, and a fella came up to him and said, "Are you shooting for anybody?" And it was Mike Billings, who was the number 2 guy in the fire crew. He goes, "No." He says, "Well, I tell you what, why don't you shoot videos or shoot movies of the cars and that, but also make sure when you shoot us doing the cleanup on it." And they used it as training films. And the safety crew at Milwaukee had a very good record. For the track, nobody could get to the scene quicker than the Milwaukee Mile guys, and they were very proud of that for many, many years. So I got those videos are available, both stock car and the IndyCar one. And anybody have questions? Yes. Yeah, SVRA just came out with a brand new magazine, and it debuted at the Circuit of the Americas, and it's a little more than just a kind of like a vintage car magazine. It's more of a lifestyle magazine, and it's going to focus on different things, not only the cars, the vintage cars and owners, but also drivers of the past, anywhere from if we go to, let's say, the Austin, Texas, what to do around Austin, Texas, or coming up here to Watkins Glen or wherever, places to go and all sorts of stuff. So it's going to be a little more than just, old cars on a track type magazine. It's kind of a glossy, it's a real high-end magazine. I, unfortunately, haven't even seen it yet, but I've been told it's wonderful. Anybody else? Oh, you bet. You bet. Grew up, there we go. Yeah, Packers, unfortunately, when September comes on, there's a lot of football I'm watching when it's starting in September. Yes, sir. Yeah, in 1954, it was paved, and then it was repaved, just surface paved in 67, and then repaved again later in 1996, I believe it was. That was more involved because they also had to raise the walls. It's interesting. People think, if you think of a oval, you think the walls are like, maybe hip high, but nowadays, when you go to a racetrack, the FIA regulations, say they have to be so high, especially with the softer barriers. So the outside walls of most oval tracks, like Milwaukee and the bigger tracks, Charlotte or whatever, they're over 5 feet tall. And yes, the road course was also redone at that point, and there was an SCCA race, regional race there this year. Yes, sir. Attendance, it's been rising in Milwaukee the last few years on the IndyCar, for the IndyCar. Now, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to change too much. This answer could take me an hour now. No, but seriously, I've been talking to people. I also do a radio show on weekends, and it's we have people call in, we talk to people too. We've had movers and shakers and racing on, and nobody has the answer. If anybody has that answer, they'd be a rich man, but there is no answer, and it's a complicated answer or question, because there's so many things going on, and I'm sure the people at Watkins Glen here are aware of it. It's so hard to the days of the dad sitting at the breakfast table looking at the paper and saying, "What are we going to do today?" "Hey, the races are in town. Let's go to the races." Those days are gone. Everything is regimented. Well, can we go to the races? No, Timmy has a softball game, and Emily has to go to a soccer game, and everything. Everybody's doing so many different things. It's harder and harder for the casual fan to get to the track because there's so many things, and that's the biggest battle being on the promotion side of it is you're trying to get people to remember there's a race in town, and trying to get them earlier and earlier to get that in their head. Oh yeah, the IndyCar race is coming into town, the NASCAR race, whatever it is, the sports car race. And so to come back year after year, and that's the toughest thing. It really is. And like I said, there's no magic pill. There's no way. But like with the kids nowadays too, the other thing we're battling is the kids aren't gearheads, and the kids most kids aren't into cars like they used to be. When you went to a racetrack, you saw that photo of the Edsel, oh, look at that, the Edsel's out there. Nowadays, what kind of car is that? Oh, it's a Chevy, because you can kind of tell the grill, it's a Chevy, And, the sanctioning bodies are trying to do something. I thought it was really neat when the Grand Am series had the Corvette prototype, because it kind of looked there are some elements of a Corvette there. But it's a constant battle trying to get kids, but I think that's the biggest thing. The one thing I would do if I was in charge of racing, if I was a racing czar, I would never charge a kid under 12 for a ticket. Get them in for free. Next. Yes. That's another thing, and that's the thing we're battling with. They have, hey, isn't there an IndyCar race coming up? That unfortunately, that's an issue, and they moved it. It's been moved. A little bit of trivia here. In 1992, the date was taken from Milwaukee right after Indy to the end of the month as punishment. They were supposed to do the inside wall. The Go Racing, the organization that was the promoter at the time, they were supposed to put concrete barriers on the inside of the track. And CART was like, when are you guys going to do this? When are you guys going to do this? And finally they said, I think in the end of the year, they said, are they in? They said, no. He said, we're taking your date. Sure enough, a month later they were up, but then they said, okay, you can have it, but you're going to be at the end of the month in 1992. So, but when the IRL and the CART split, it was still a viable race on the CART side. And then 2004, Milwaukee was the only track to host an IRL race and a CART race in the same year. And you would think that would put us on some good footing for Milwaukee, but unfortunately, issues on the money side of it, I was operations side that I was involved with. Fortunately, I guess we weren't involved on the promotional side, or not the promotional side, but the money side, and there was issues. And I went through 4 promoters in 5 years after Haas left, and that wasn't fun, and so, but the sanctioning bodies, they're like, well, is it a go or a not go? So you had Texas, Texas is going, hey, we'll take it. They want it, and they got it, and then Roger Penske took it back for Belle Isle. So now there's talk next year that possibly the season may end at Milwaukee, which would be good, but we'll see what happens. I think it should be after Indy. I think that would, for what's happening in Milwaukee at that time, that's a really good date to have. It's right before we have what's called Summerfest. That's a lakefront music festival, and you have the State Fair and all these other things. Milwaukee, because of the weather, parties hard between May and Labor Day, because of the snow. I mean, you gotta be out when it's nice, I'm sure you guys up here, it might be similar, but so that would be the best day. Yes, sir. That's interesting. Tom Marchese was so honest that he never fudged his numbers. And I forget what year, but one year they had, I think it was 19,999. And Al, who I knew was the publicity man and later the historian, he goes, Tom, just one ticket. Come on. Tom was like, nope, it was 1999. That's the attendance. And, Al's like, it should be 20, just say 20. Nope, they didn't fudge the numbers. But the height would be, mid-60s to right around 1970. And that was because we had traditionally 6 races. It was such a strong schedule. But it was a different time, though, too. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway, this was their promotion. This is all they had to do for promotion. They had a billboard north of Indianapolis and a billboard south. That was pretty much it. And then Tony would send out his Christmas glasses and that to friends, sponsors, and supporters. That's all you had to do back then. Same thing with Milwaukee too. Pretty much, they would what they would do is, and this is one thing that you don't see anymore, because teams that travel, the difference between now and then, teams, they travel the whole circuit. At IndyCar you have, in NASCAR you have 40 some teams. They race the whole circuit. Back then, teams would pick and choose. What that gave you to do when newspapers were so powerful, they would leak out the entry list. Oh, AJ Foyt's going to run the Rex Mace Classic this year, and then Lloyd Ruby announced his entry, and then Lindsey Hopkins is going to have a couple cars, and that's how they would get their name in that into the sports pages, and you got free publicity that way. So. But it was, I would say, and most tracks this was true too, was the late, mid to late 60s was the zenith of attendance at Milwaukee. Yeah, it's 9 degrees. But when they repaved it in 96, it looked a heck of a lot, but I had engineers tell me, no, it's the same, it's 9 degrees. So it has a little bit of banking, but not necessarily. But the biggest thing that separates Milwaukee and a lot of other tracks is its width. A lot of people don't realize this. Milwaukee is wider than Indianapolis was at one time. It was a wider racetrack. So, yes, next. Ted Lake, yes. That's a good one. Yeah, Ted Lake was an observer. Worked for AAA back then. Started at Indianapolis, I believe, 1929, I believe it was. And he worked for AAA and then later USAC, and was the chief observer at Indianapolis for many, many, many years. And he was one of those behind-the-scenes kind of guy. And Ted was a neat guy visually, because Ted was one of these guys, he went bald very early on. Kind of had a big nose on him and a voice, like this. And he was probably about 5'8", and shrunk every year from that point on. And he wasn't overbearing if you just looked at him, but if you talked to him, he was a guy, he was bigger than life. And he worked for many, many years. He worked at Milwaukee, and they had what they call the Ted Lake Shack, and that's where he held court. And everybody would go in there after races to hang out, because that was the happening place to be. And then later, in his 80s, went to work for Buddy Job and Dennis, what's his name, at Phoenix, and worked there until he was like 88 years old. And unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But Ted Lake was he's definitely one of the personalities at the mile and elsewhere too. Anybody else? Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, they're interesting. What happened in 1983 is the contract for exclusive promotion expired, and they went up for a bid. And of Granted, it was kind of stagnant. The promotion with the Wisconsin Auto Racing, which was originally the Marchese's, and then later John Cation, was kind of stagnant. And the Jufrey brothers came in there and kind of said, we're going to do X, Y, Z, but unfortunately did not. And they, to be blunt, they rubbed a few people the wrong way. They're still around to this day, though. If you see all the cranes up at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, those are their cranes. Anybody else?
We have one race that's particularly remarkable.
For me, it's the Mike Mosley race. Coming from last place, I mean, I was a fan of Mike Mosley, not only that, of Dan Gurney. And for what, especially after the disappointment that year, in 1981 in Indianapolis, they were on the front row at Indy, and the people that were cheering for the stock blocks that I were, you're always cheering for the underdog. And here's Dan Gurney. The previous year, they were developing this John Ward design car, and it was different. Then the cars were kind of all looking. The marches were starting to come in and that, and they kind of were looking. With the side skirts and everything, they had a look. They were starting to get that look that went through the 90s. But when that car showed up, I mean, that thing looked like a hot rod. The narrow front end, the wide back end, and it had that throatiness of the Chevy stock block. And watching that car just cut through the field, and you're like, well, this thing's going to blow up, right? I mean, Mike's just going to charge. He's going to make them know that we were there, And he goes out to win that race. It was incredible for me. It was that race. And then you talk to people, like I said, that Don Davis, when he was leading AJ in the dirt car, and then later, a couple years later, when AJ won the pole in the dirt car. Those are races people, the old timers, still talk about today. Anybody else? That was Duke Dismore, yeah. Ted Horn. Rex Mays, yeah. Right, 4. It was actually 4 of them. Yeah. And that was 1948. That was the year. Then later that year, that number 1 car, Ted, was killed at Du Quoin. And what was kind of sad about that, and it was typical of Ted and what a kind of character he was that was a race they added at the end of the year. But because he had won the national championship, he didn't have to run it, but he felt obligated that he should because he was a national champion. He was the face of the Indy cars at the time. He thought, no, I'm going to run the race because, the fans deserve to see the national champion. And unfortunately, a spindle broke on the car, and he was fatally injured. But Ted Horn he has an incredible finishing record at probably the best finishing record at Indianapolis without winning the race. People talk about Lloyd Ruby and how many times he was leading the race, which is true, and then would have issues in the race. But Ted, with Ted, he had, I think, 7 or 8 out of 9 years he had a top 5 finish. So it was ran very, very well. And with the points system the way it was set up, he would take those points and he would win the national championship. He didn't, eke his way in either. I mean, he would win races, but he was a dominant driver of the late 40s after the war. But, especially Indy, that was true with him because he just couldn't seal the deal at Indy for a variety of reasons. But he was also, Ted was probably one of the first professional drivers too. I was at a gentleman's house who he has quite an extensive racing collection. He has Ted Horn's typewriter. I said, I can picture Ted Horn because Ted Horn was such a professional. He would typewrite letters, fan letters and whatnot out to people. And he was, one of the real first professional drivers. He always dressed nice at the racetrack and gave a professional accounting of himself. No, he was, well, he drove the old Boyle's car, the Boyle car, the Mike Boyle out of, he was a union boss, kind of a, I guess it's a mafia too involved. They had some mafia money, and Cotton Henning was the mechanic and had the Maseratis. And then when Mike Boyle stepped aside, the Bennett brothers was a group. They had some money. They took over the operation, but it was Cotton Henning's team really, and Ted Horn drove for him. And that's Ted Horn. Originally, I think it was Ohio now, but he was. You ever hear of the Gasoline Alley out of New Jersey, Patterson, New Jersey? He was based out of there, out of New Jersey. That's where he raced out of. Anybody else in the back? Yeah, 85 was the last year for the stock car series, but it was a ghost of itself by then. The last year they ran at Milwaukee was 82, but they were really on life support from pretty much 1980 on. And it was really sad watching it because I was such a fan of that series back then. It was such a strong series too, and they, USAC is such a frustrating organization, and it was an Indy-centric organization. Milwaukee was a very strong. Milwaukee's always been number 2 to Indianapolis, but Indianapolis. This is hopefully I won't make this too complicated. It's very unusual. When I was a kid, I was a fan of racing. I liked all sorts of racing. And then I started to, the more and more involved I got into it, I started to meet people in Indianapolis, and I noticed that the people in Indianapolis were Indy 500 fans. Not IndyCar fans, Indy 500 fans. That's all they knew. They didn't follow the racing elsewhere in that. And I never really understood that. And I'm on Facebook, and there's, if you're in the old, there's the pros and cons in Facebook. And there's a right way to do Facebook, and there's a lot of neat pages on there. And there's a fellow, I won't mention him, but he wrote a book on Indy cars, and they'll show photos of Trenton and Milwaukee, and he's like, wow, whose car is that? And this is stuff I would think he would know, but he's just an Indy guy. He only paid attention to cars that raced at Indianapolis and nowhere else, and it's. So when the stock car, the powers to be at USAC, that's all they cared about was the Indy 500 and then all the IndyCar series and that. And Al Krause told me a story. He was at a USAC meeting in the late 50s, and Dwayne Carter was the head of competition, and Tom Marchese was talking about promoting the stock cars better. He's like, Dwayne, we got 4 races at Milwaukee. They do a heck of a business. You guys need to promote the stock car series. This thing is really growing. And Dwayne Carter basically said, F the stock cars. I don't care about those GDs, taxi cabs. And Tom was like, and there was quite a division. You talked to USAC old timers. There was a people that just did not want the stock cars to succeed. And who knows where the USAC series would be. I mean, it's complicated. There's no easy thing. When you get into the CART IRL thing, or CART USAC thing even, 1979, I understand the reasonings and that, and I agree with a lot of them, but USAC, just, you kind of shake your head, and it's very frustrating. Yes? Well, it's amazing how similar Watkins Glen and Elkhart Lake is. It is just, anybody who's been to both cities and tracks, I mean, it's from the age and everything, it's quite exciting. And coming here, we were walking downtown, and I'm like, this is so much, a lot of it is so much like Elkhart Lake, and I even made a a little remark on Facebook. I'm like, I joked about who the heck replaced Gessert's with Ben and Jerry's. And for those who have been to Elkhart Lake, there's an old-time ice cream parlor in downtown Elkhart Lake called Gessert's. And sure enough, you know, Watkins Glen, you guys have Ben and Jerry's. And I just thought that was so funny. And the years are pretty close too. You know, with the road racing that started here, and then also at Road America, or Elkhart Lake, I should say. The reason to start with Elkhart Lake, after the war, they were having issues. Elkhart Lake was. It was a resort community, and after the war, the businesses were really hurting. The people weren't returning to Elkhart Lake to vacation. They needed something. They saw what was happening here at Watkins Glen, and they decided maybe we should do something like that here. The first year they had, I think it was 40-some thousand, and they're like, this is great. The second year, they doubled it and quadrupled it. And then unfortunately, with the issues that happened here, with road racing, you know, it wasn't a viable sport to be racing on the roads, on city, county roads. So they decided to they incorporated and started a corporation and built the track in 1955. And what's amazing about that track is how it was built is how it is today. That same track, the corners and everything have been undisturbed. There's little minor things they've done, and of course there's safeties and runoff areas and whatnot. And but how the track was, there's photos in the book that you'll see. You can see turn 5. You look at turn 5, you can tell it's turn 5. And I think that's one of the things that people love about the book, and also about Road America, though, is how the track is so similar back then as it is today. And they wanted to keep that. You know, there was talk in the 80s about Formula One coming, and thank God it didn't, because for what they would had to do to that track in order to get Formula One there and to do stuff. I mean, when they had bike racing there, they had to add a chicane to the backside by the kink. But other than that, I mean, that was a minor thing. It's there. It doesn't really take away from the track. So, but Elkhart Lake it's a neat town, and like I said, it's so similar to Watkins Glen. It's I just love it here. This has been a real eye-opening. I'm so appreciative of the group getting me out here, because it's been a lot of fun. At the Pfister Hotel. Oh, really? Is that Al? Are you Al? Al. You know, Al, you and I spent the time at Hills Corners. We spent the night at Hills Corners Speedway. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. It goes. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. We will. No. The USAC banquet was, whereas Milwaukee was the base for the USAC stock car racing, so much that the annual banquet was held at Milwaukee at the Pfister Hotel, which is downtown. And my father attended it many times, and from what I hear, it was quite the good time too. In fact, Andy's dad was there a few times too, and they would that went late into the evening, and a lot of movers and shakers were there. But that's where they would crown the USAC champion, and like I said, going back with Milwaukee, that was a very, very strong series, but unfortunately, it just kind of withered on the vine, so to speak. Anybody else? Yeah. Well, I haven't been to Seneca, so I can't say, but I will be there shortly. I'm on my way. We'll be there later. So, but Seepkins, yeah, I spent. Maybe I should share this. Susan's probably thinking maybe we shouldn't, but we were there. If you guys remember Peter Bryant, who developed the Can-Am car, the Shadow Can-Am car, I was in there with some people, and Peter was in our group. And it was getting late, and somehow the subject of David Hobbs came on mind. I said, David lives a block from here. And so the group of us staggered into the darkness, downtown Elkhart Lake, around the corner to David's house, where most of the lights were off, and Peter's pounding on the door at 1:30 in the morning, and they're wondering probably what the heck was going on. Then we kind of staggered off, but David got a kick out of it when I told him the story later. Yes. It has. I think it's more. That was more of a kind of a olive branch to the manufacturers. When they say, well, we're developing turbochargers because it's much more friendlier. No, the reason was because the manufacturers wanted turbochargers. That's the bottom. Well, and a lot of the cars are going towards that technology again. Turbocharging was big in the mid 80s and with the American manufacturer. So the Honda and Chevrolet went to the powers to be IndyCar and said, we would like turbocharging. And when the manufacturer says that, you do it. Same thing with the Generation 6 car that NASCAR has. That was because the manufacturers wanted it, and two of them had threatened to pull out. That's why we have a Generation 6 car from the car tomorrow. And it's you talk to people, you can kind of see through that. If you've been racing long enough, when decisions are made, what they say and why they were made are two different things. The people I co-host the show with a gentleman who's kind of newer in auto racing, and it's been quite the joy educating him. And he always will ask me, why the heck are they doing this? I said, what's the number one reason? He knows it now. He goes, money. I said, yeah, always follow the money, because that's what makes racing, and it makes everything go around. So manufacturers are good for IndyCar racing because of the publicity it gives it. Gives it a little, granted, you would like grassroots and all that stuff, but that's another story. But you want that. When Honda wins the Indy 500 or whoever, you want that full-page ad in the USA Today. That's what any series wants. They want the publicity behind it. So, yeah. It kind of came that way. Yeah, the ARCA series is kind of interesting. ARCA is what USAC would be. There's a lot of people that, in fact, that are involved in ARCA that have their roots in the USAC series. Dave Argabright even wrote a book on Larry Moore. He was a track record holder in Milwaukee. His roots go back to the USAC stock car series. But getting back, I forgot, I got sidetracked, but USAC series at Milwaukee. Yes, we've had USAC series at Milwaukee, and I would always get these people say, we need a midget race, we need a Silver Crown race at Milwaukee. I'm like, well, and bottom line is money. If the sanctioning fee is good enough, fine. 2008 we had them. I think it was 2007, 2008. We had a 100-lap midget race and Silver Crown race. We had maybe 2,000 people in the stands for it. So, I mean, it's very frustrating. I'm a fan of it. I'm involved with a Silver Crown team, trying to promote it, and it's really an uphill battle. It really is, because people don't understand the Silver Crowns. For those who don't realize it, Silver Crown comes from the roots is an Indy car, which has a 96-inch wheelbase, and they raced. They were just here at Syracuse at the fairgrounds in front of a small crowd, but they race at the Indiana Fairgrounds, and they want to come back to Milwaukee. But it's a struggle because people don't even know what a Silver Crown car is anymore. You know, it's a championship dirt car, basically. So anyway, one more?
Steve, you've been doing great here, and you don't look like you're tired out, but
No.
We've held this man for an hour and a half. If you
Time flies.
If you feel like going on, if you want to take a little break.
I'll do one more. I'll do one more question, anybody? Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Turbine cars, it was Mario drove the 60 car, Parnelli drove the 20 car, and Vince Granatelli drove the 70, I think it was. Yeah, Lotus 56 turbine cars. And that was the first time they ran them. And it was really neat to see all three of them. I've always been a fan of the turbine cars, and they actually earlier the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the museum had most of the turbine cars that raced at Indy 2 at the museum, including the F1 car, the Lotus 56 F1 car that Emerson Fittipaldi ran, and I think Rennie Weasel, and the car ran. I don't know if it ran here at Watkins Glen. I know I ran an Italian Grand Prix, but that was actually the car Mike Spence was killed in at Indy. A lot of people don't realize that. That was the number 30 car that he was killed in before qualifying. And that car was shipped back to England, and then later became the F1 turbine car. So, yeah, that was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I was really neat to see him you'd see them on track, and it was up to me. They could run 10 laps instead of the 1 lap they ran. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, Steve, thank you. I think they would have kept you here all afternoon. You know, your depth of knowledge is just incredible. This man hides his light under a bushel. As the evening went on and the afternoon went on, we realized the depth of and the variety of racing that Steve is very knowledgeable on, and we are thrilled that you came here to Watkins Glen, and we're going to make you a Watkins Glen honorary citizen.
Oh, thank you.
Not only Milwaukee and Elkhart Lake, but Watkins Glen. And Steve will be available for more questions, and sign his book if you would like to buy one of his books, and we can converse over in the center further. I don't mean to cut you off, because if you've got the energy, we've got the time. We rented the hall for the whole afternoon, so.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good. No, if you guys have any questions, feel free to bend my ear, and then I got the videos too. So the videos are labor of love for me, and they cover both the stock cars and the Indy cars. I got 20 years of Indy car footage on there, and then the stock cars is a variety of stock car videos too. So
thanks again.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.